It was just a roast. Just a Sunday. But I remember the way Lauren held the carving knife, angled like a conductor's baton, confident and rehearsed. Jake sat at the head of the table, smiling like he didn't notice she'd taken my place. I set the pie down, apple, braided crust, brushed with egg the way my mother taught me. 20 years of Thanksgivings and homecomings, and I brought your favorite, sweetheart, in every slice. Lauren didn't look up from her plate. Just smiled, tight and efficient. Oh, Maggie, next time let's coordinate the menu ahead of time. Jake and I are trying to go gluten-free. There it was. Kind, on the surface. A suggestion. A gentle correction. I nodded. Said nothing. Slid into my seat. But something shifted. Not in the room, in me. Not just the pie was dismissed. I was. Jake asked Lauren to pass the salt. Not me. Miles giggled about something from school, and when I asked, he looked to her for permission to answer. I used to be the son in this kitchen. Now I was an extra chair. And in that quiet, in that breath of being overlooked, something tightened inside me. I didn't show it. Didn't make a sound. But for the first time in my life, I felt it. I was being written out of my own story. This house was never just a structure. We bought it when Jake was 8, before braces, before his voice changed, back when he still asked for extra bedtime stories. The porch came later, built one summer when Howard and I were too poor for vacations but still rich in time. He sketched the frame on a napkin. I stained the wood. We hung a wind chime that's still there, faint, steady, unnoticed until the silence lets it sing. The maple tree in the backyard was Jake's. He brought home the sapling in a Dixie cup from school, beaming like he'd brought me treasure. We dug the hole together. Now it's taller than the house, roots curling deep where our hands once pressed soil. Holidays were sacred. Ham in spring. Roast in December. Pie every November. I kept the linen drawer full, the crystal wrapped in tissue, the traditions stitched into each season. Not out of obligation, but out of love. Love so persistent, it folded napkins and refilled wine glasses even when no one noticed. When Jake met Lauren, I opened my arms before he asked. She was beautiful, polished, and quiet in that way that always feels like waiting. I set an extra place for her the first night they came. I passed down my mother's casserole dish. I offered the nursery before she knew she was pregnant. And when Miles was born, I offered more. Rocking chairs, midnight feedings, homemade soup, endless hands. I knew when Lauren needed space. I knew when she didn't. I learned her rhythms, even when she never learned mine. I didn't ask for praise. Didn't keep score. Family, to me, was something you tend like a garden, quietly, consistently, often alone. But lately, I've felt the chill. Not all at once, not dramatically. No arguments. No slammed doors. Just a slow erasure. A towel in the guest bath replaced. The teacups I gave them boxed up in the garage. Photos of Jake and Miles, bright and curated, Lauren's watermark faint in the corner like a signature on a canvas she now claims. It was Miles who broke the illusion. He sat at the kitchen table with a red crayon, coloring a picture of a house. 4 windows, a sun, a tree. No porch. No swing. No grandma. Just a neat, square family. Who's this? I asked, pointing to the stick figures. That's me, he said proudly. That's Daddy. That's Mommy. That's our house. And Grandma. He looked up. Blinked. Then shrugged. Mom says you don't live here anymore. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. But inside, something hardened. I stood very still, as if motion might crack me. He returned to coloring. Later that day, I found my favorite armchair, green velvet, sun-warmed from the east window, sitting in the garage beside a box labeled "Donate." No one mentioned it. No one asked. Lauren smiled over dinner and offered me kale instead of bread. "We're cutting down on starches," she said sweetly. "You understand?" I nodded. "Yes. I understand. I understand more than anyone thinks I do." And then came the candles. Lauren always kept the house neat, curated. But on Thursdays, when Jake worked across town, I noticed something odd. The guest bathroom candle would be lit, lavender and citrus, always trimmed. A wineglass in the sink, even though they don't drink midweek. The scent of expensive cologne lingering faintly in the hallway. And Seth, Jake's business partner, started dropping by on those same Thursdays. First for documents. Then lunch. Then longer. His car parked out front, always gone before Jake returned. The way Lauren laughed on those days, lighter, freer. Her lipstick brighter. Her phone always face down. I'm not blind. I know patterns. And this wasn't a friendship. This was something wrapped in secrecy and spritzed in perfume. I watched. I waited. I said nothing. But inside, the puzzle began assembling. And the picture it formed wasn't pretty. Not of affairs, not only. But of something deeper. A shift. A quiet reordering of who belongs, and who is expendable. It wasn't about the roast. Or the pie. Or the towel. It was about control. And it was working. Because I, Maggie, who had fed and built and filled every corner of this house, was starting to feel like a guest. A tolerated fixture. A fading photograph in someone else's frame. So I stopped asking to be seen. And I started watching, closely. Because when the walls start whispering, sometimes it's not anger you need. It's clarity. I didn't confront Jake. That part of me, the part that would plead or protest, was gone. Sifted out like flour, slowly, over years of being smiled at while edged aside. Jake wouldn't hear me now. Not through Lauren's careful curation of his life. Her words had weight. Mine had become background noise. So I stayed silent. And I began preparing, not for confrontation. But for confirmation. The private investigator's name came from Linda, a quiet woman at my book club. She said it with the same reverence one might reserve for a priest or a surgeon. Marcus Hale. Former FBI, now private, methodical, discreet. Expensive. It cost nearly half my monthly income to retain him. I dipped into my savings, the account I'd been building for a trip to see the Northern Lights. I told myself truth was a kind of light too. And colder. Marcus never asked why I suspected. He didn't need to. He simply nodded, handed me a non-disclosure form, and said, "Give me 1 week." 7 days. 7 days of keeping my head down, my tone light, my face smooth. 7 days of smiling at Lauren across teacups and watching her eyes glance just past mine. 7 days of letting Miles draw pictures in my lap, always 3 people in the house, never 4. On the 8th morning, the call came. Marcus's voice was low, calm. "You were right," he said. "And not just about the affair. Not just. That's what caught me." He sent a file via courier. It arrived in a slim manila envelope with no return address. I waited until the house was empty to open it. Jake had taken Miles to the park. Lauren was at yoga. Inside, photographs, time-stamped. One of Lauren entering a boutique hotel on a Thursday afternoon. One of Seth arriving 10 minutes later. One of them leaving separately, hours apart. A second series, a lunch at a bistro, a hand grazing an arm, a kiss exchanged too confidently for mere colleagues. Then, documents. Financial transfers, unusual ones, from Jake's business account to a private entity under Seth's name. Some routed through a secondary account linked to Lauren. Amounts small enough to avoid suspicion. Large enough to be intentional. Emails. Screen captures. Password resets. She wasn't just disloyal. She was siphoning from his company. Quietly. Elegantly. Destruction dressed in soft smiles. I read the report twice. The third time, I didn't cry. I didn't even feel anger. Just a sharpness, like waking from a long, aching sleep. I knew what came next. But not how. For 3 days, I walked the garden. Watered plants that didn't need watering. Stared at the tree Jake had once planted, now sturdy and tall. I tried to remember his voice before it softened for her. Before it stopped reaching me altogether. Then I made a decision. Not revenge. Not exposure. Clarity. I invited them to dinner. Jake and Lauren. No Miles, I asked for an adults-only evening. I told them I wanted to celebrate their anniversary early. I smiled when I said it. Lauren looked wary, but nodded. Jake seemed touched. He even offered to bring wine. I set the table with the good china. Ironed the napkins. Polished the silver. I baked the pie, gluten and all. And I dusted the living room. The one where Jake had once played with toy trains. Where we'd read books on stormy nights. I mounted the screen above the fireplace. A digital one. Gifted years ago, barely used. Connected it to the laptop. Synced the files. Tested the volume. Then I waited. They arrived on time. Lauren wore cream silk and a bracelet I hadn't seen before. Jake kissed my cheek. His cologne was the same one Howard used to wear. I couldn't decide if that comforted or crushed me. We ate. We toasted. Lauren complimented the roast, though she didn't eat much. Jake told me Miles was learning to read. I nodded, smiled, poured wine. Every moment folded inward like paper. Then I stood. Picked up the remote. Before dessert, I said, a little something for the family. Lauren froze. Jake looked puzzled. I pressed play. Silence first. Then the footage. Lauren stepping into the hotel. Seth following. Time stamps blinking in the corner. The bistro. The transfer receipts. Emails. A full unraveling, quiet and brutal, unaccompanied by explanation. I didn't look at her. I watched Jake. His face changed slowly. From polite confusion, to stillness, to something deeper. Something crumbling from inside. His hand, holding the wine glass, began to tremble. Lauren stood. Her mouth moved, denial, defense, disbelief, but I didn't listen. I didn't need to. I looked at Jake one last time. Then I turned and walked out of the room. I didn't hear the door close behind me. I didn't need to. The silence told me everything. Some truths don't echo. They settle. And this one settled into every wall of that house like smoke after a fire. Outside, the evening was cool. The sky a deep indigo, the wind barely stirring the maple leaves. I walked the perimeter of the garden twice, not because I needed to think, but because I didn't know what to do with the stillness. With the choice I'd already made. I didn't go back inside that night. I stayed at a friend's, Darla, from the quilting group. She didn't ask why. Just pulled out her extra sheets and set a kettle on the stove. "You're welcome as long as you need," she said. I slept without dreaming. The next morning, the first text came. Lauren. No words. Just a question mark. Then, what exactly do you think you've done? Then, you need to undo this before it spreads. I didn't reply. By noon, a call from Jake. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. His voice sounded tired, stripped of its usual weight. Mom. I don't know what to say. I need to think. I'll call you soon. I didn't save the message. By the end of the day, Lauren had blocked me. The fallout was slow at first. Seth vanished. I heard through one of Jake's colleagues that his position had been phased out. Lauren's name disappeared from the company records within a week. I imagined the conversations, her polished voice turning shrill, her calm dissolving under scrutiny. She sent one final email. I printed it, not to read again, but to remember what cruelty looks like dressed in silk. You've ruined everything. Jake will regret trusting you. I smiled when I read that part. Because what she couldn't understand, what people like her never understand, is that trust doesn't come from words. It comes from time. From sacrifice. From the quiet, steady presence of someone who stays even when it hurts. Jake didn't call for days. Then weeks. I returned to the house, the one with the porch swing and the maple tree, alone. The front door creaked the way it always had. My slippers waited by the bench. I opened the windows and let the air pass through. The curtains danced. The silence settled again, but this time, it didn't sting. I moved through each room, touching surfaces as if reacquainting myself with an old friend. The photographs were still gone, Lauren had removed the older ones months ago. I found them boxed in the attic, tucked behind holiday decorations. I unpacked them one by one. Jake at 5 with chocolate on his cheeks. Jake at 10, holding a fish half his size. Howard laughing, arms slung around my shoulders. I hung each one back up. Slowly. Intentionally. One morning, I took down the pale curtains in the guest room, Lauren's old touch, and replaced them with the lace ones I'd embroidered years ago. The ones that filtered light just so, casting dappled patterns on the floorboards. That room would be Miles's when he came to visit again. I left a toy truck on the windowsill. Just in case. It was the second Saturday after everything unraveled when Jake came. I heard the car first. His footsteps were slow on the porch. I opened the door before he knocked. He looked older. Not in his face, but in his eyes. Something had been peeled away. Some illusion. He didn't ask to come in. Just stood there, hands shoved deep into his coat pockets. You knew, he said finally, voice raw. You knew all of it. I nodded. You said nothing. There wasn't anything to say, I replied. He shook his head. Looked out at the yard. The swing swayed gently in the wind. You could have told me. I did, I said, softer. Just not with words. He let out a long breath. Sat on the porch swing without asking. I sat beside him. A minute passed. Then 5. The wind rustled the leaves. The chimes clinked. She's gone, he said at last. Packed her things. Left a note. I didn't ask what the note said. She's already filed, he added. I nodded again. Another pause. I keep wondering, he said, how long you knew. How much you saw. Enough, I answered. He turned to me then. Why didn't you say something sooner? I looked at him, my son, grown, wounded, searching. Because sometimes, Jake, people have to find their own bottom before they look up. And if I had warned you too early, you might have just learned to protect her lies instead of seeing them. He blinked, and I saw it, that flicker of grief for something he hadn't even known he was losing. I hate her, he whispered. No, I said, touching his arm gently. You hate what she made you forget. He looked down. I forgot you. I didn't speak. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small frame, one of the pictures I had rehung. The one of him at 5, chocolate smeared, laughing. I found this on my desk, he said. No idea how it got there. I smiled. Maybe the house remembered. He laughed once, short, broken. Then we sat. Two shadows on a porch swing, swaying with the rhythm of a second chance. Jake started visiting on Saturdays. At first, he said little. He'd bring small repairs with him, hinges that creaked, garden paths needing weeding, a broken shutter on the south window. I didn't ask him to fix anything. He just arrived with his sleeves rolled and a quiet look in his eyes, like he was trying to stitch something that didn't have edges anymore. I made coffee the way he used to like it, 2 sugars, no cream. He didn't say thank you the first few times. Just drank it slowly, watching the steam, as if listening to what wasn't being said. One morning, I heard him humming in the hallway. He was putting up new curtain rods, the old drill whirring low and steady, and under his breath, he hummed a song I used to sing when he was small. Something from a lullaby tape we'd worn out, he hadn't hummed it since he was 8. That's when I knew. Not that he forgave me. Not even that he forgave himself. But that something in him had softened. That same week, he brought Miles. Lauren hadn't fought it. According to Jake, she had other arrangements. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't press. Miles ran into the kitchen like nothing had ever changed. He climbed into the stool beside the counter and asked if I still had the blue plate with the cow on it. I did. It was in the back of the cabinet, behind the dishes Lauren had ordered online. I served him eggs and toast on that plate, and he smiled without knowing why it mattered. He drew pictures again, this time with 4 figures, and a sun with a face. I asked him who was who. That's Daddy, that's me, that's Grandma, he pointed, then paused. And that one? I asked. He shrugged. That's someone else. I smiled. Left it there. After breakfast, we sat on the porch. Jake leaned against the rail, Miles curled beside me with a blanket over his legs. Claire called me, Jake said quietly. I looked at him. Claire, he repeated. From college. The one the one before Lauren. I remembered her. Quiet, warm. Always remembered my name. Brought pumpkin bread in fall. She's a school counselor now, he continued. Working with kids who've gone through stuff. Said she saw my name in the news. I guess the company shakeup made headlines. Did you tell her what happened? I asked. Some, he said. Not all. He paused. She wants to visit. She asked about Miles. I didn't say anything. Just tucked the blanket tighter around Miles. Jake cleared his throat. She said something that stuck with me. I waited. She said he doesn't need to share your DNA to be your son. I looked at him then, really looked. There was no bitterness in his face. No shame. Just something like hope, cautious and fragile. Do you believe that? I asked. He nodded. I do now. Later, after they'd gone, I sat in the living room and watched the evening fold itself over the furniture. Light shifted across the photos on the wall, old memories catching gold edges. I walked to the desk drawer and pulled out the last page of Marcus's report, the one I hadn't shared. It was a letter. Typed. Not to me, not to Jake. It was from Lauren. To Seth. It read like a plan. The affair was never just personal, it was strategic. They'd discussed options. Discussed exit strategies. The timing of Jake's out-of-town meetings, the access to company accounts, the potential sell-off of assets. It was all calculated. There was even a paragraph, chilling in its simplicity, outlining how to mitigate the influence of the mother. Me. She's aging. Sentimental. Easy to isolate. Jake is soft where she's concerned. Let's keep that softness shallow. I kept that page. Not to show Jake. Not to hurt him. But to remind myself of what I'd known before the roast, before the pie, before the silence. That some battles are quiet. And some victories are invisible. That the cost of dignity is high, but the cost of losing it is worse. Lauren never came back. The divorce was quick, no children to fight over. Jake didn't mention her much. Her name became background, like an appliance that hums even after it's unplugged. One day, he brought Claire. She was gentler than I remembered. Older, of course, and quieter in her movements. But when she looked at Miles, I saw something in her soften. He showed her his drawings. She praised them with a voice that didn't feel rehearsed. When she turned to me, she took my hand and said, "You held him together." I didn't know if she meant Jake or Miles. Maybe both. Months passed. Jake took over the business full-time. Rebuilt it from the foundation. Renamed it. Started hosting staff meetings at the house sometimes. Miles got taller. I kept his height marked on the wall in the laundry room. I had started that tradition when Jake was 6. I showed them both the old pencil lines. On Thanksgiving, Jake asked me to make the pie. I pretended to hesitate. "Well," I said, "it's gluten-full." He smiled. "Good." That night, we sat around the same table. The same chairs. Same candles. But it wasn't the same. It was quieter. But full. Jake lifted his glass and said, "To clarity." I lifted mine. "To roots," I said. We clinked gently. No applause. No drama. Just that soft, steady kind of peace that comes when you know you didn't lose yourself. Even when others tried to misplace you. Spring came late that year. The kind of spring that doesn't announce itself with blossoms, but with softness, wet soil, birdsong barely audible through an open window. I was pruning the roses when I heard footsteps behind me. Miles. He stood at the edge of the porch, holding something wrapped in tissue paper. "It's for you," he said. "From school. We were supposed to make something for someone who keeps us safe." I took it carefully. Unwrapped it slowly. It was a clay heart, misshapen, glazed in blue. My name, Grandma M., was carved crookedly across the front. I didn't cry. Not quite. Just stood there, heart full in my chest, warm and steady. Jake stepped forward. "Claire and we've been talking." I turned. He looked nervous, hopeful. "We're getting married. Nothing big. Just a few close people. And, well, we were hoping to have it here. At the house." He waited, like the answer mattered more than anything. I nodded. "Of course. And we'd like you to officiate." That stopped me. "I'm not a minister." "You are to us," he said. "You kept the truth. You carried it when I couldn't." Behind him, Claire stepped onto the porch. She held Miles' hand. "I want to adopt him," she said softly. "If he's ready." Miles looked up at me. "Would that be okay?" I knelt to his level, brushing a curl from his forehead. "Family isn't made with papers," I whispered. "But if this is what you want, then yes. It's more than okay." The ceremony was small. The house smelled of lilacs. Jake wore a simple suit. Claire wore her mother's dress. Miles handed them the rings. I stood beneath the maple tree Jake planted at 8 years old and spoke the words they asked me to say. But I added my own. Family is not always loud. It doesn't always clap when you arrive or weep when you leave. Sometimes, it's quiet. Sometimes, it waits. Sometimes, it breaks. But if it's real, it rebuilds. Afterward, we ate on the porch. Claire made lemon cake. Jake poured wine. Miles fell asleep with his head in my lap. And I looked around, not for who was missing, but for who remained. The porch I'd built. The tree we planted. The faces I helped shape, and the lives I'd carried when they didn't know I was carrying them. I thought of all the women who disappear into the quiet. Who give without asking. Who are told to sit down, step aside, be less. And I thought, no. We remember. We wait. And when the moment comes, we rise, not in fury, but in fullness. This was never about revenge. It was about remembering. I sat back in my chair, the wind soft against my face. I was no longer waiting to be seen. I was home.